was a time when marketing was more heavily art than science. But with the amount of data available to us today, it can't be ignored that it's the data that helps us make the best decisions and understand the quality of the marketing work that we've done. This doesn't mean that understanding how to gather and interpret all this data is easy, though. Luckily, we have people like today's guest to help us understand and navigate through all the data tools and analytics available to marketers and businesses. Today's guest is a go-to guy when you want to dig deep into the analytics of marketing. He's a co-founder and chief data scientist at TrustInsights.ai, a marketing analytics consulting firm. He's a keynote speaker who's been on stage for companies such as IBM, Marketo, Salesforce, HubSpot, and more, where he shares his knowledge on digital marketing, marketing technology, and artificial intelligence. And most of all, he bridges the gap between marketing and technology. By the end of this podcast, I'm sure you'll want to follow him and keep learning from his insights. So welcome to the podcast, Christopher Penn.
Thanks for having me.
Man, I'm really looking forward to, and I apologize to the listeners. We're going to be all over the place because Chris has so much knowledge that I want to tap into and share with you. And I'm sure, Chris, that there's a lot more to your expertise than what I just stated. So you want to give us a brief summary of how you find yourself at the crossroads of data and marketing?
The really short version is I'm an IT guy by trade. And in the early 2000s, I just joined this financial services company where I was the CTO, the whatever this, and I was also the guy who cleaned the restaurant on Fridays because it was just a 3-person startup. And what happened over that decade was that technology and marketing converged to become what we call today marketing technology. So update the web server became update the website. Fix, Unix send mail became send the email newsletter. And my career pivoted to becoming what we now call marketing technology. The term didn't exist back then. And in 2011 was when Google Analytics released multi-channel funnels, the ability to track and do more than just last touch attribution. And it was at that point where I really pivoted again to focusing on analytics and data. A couple of years later, I joined a PR agency as a VP of marketing technology and started working more with data science and machine learning and AI. And then in 2018, kind of outgrew where I was at the time. And with my partner, we founded Trust Insights and just doubled down on data and organizational change and understanding how to make stuff work better, frankly. And that's the very short version of how we got here.
That's interesting because on a previous couple of shows, I talked with other people who were in the marketing field, but none of us came from marketing. And I'm realizing the more marketers I talk to, the rarer it is that you started from high school or college with, I'm going to be a marketer. The last 2 people I talked to were journalists. I was a content creator, and you're from IT, and we all end up in this world, which shows you how broad marketing is and how many disciplines it takes to be an effective marketer. And we need all those disciplines. And I really respect the IT portion of it because myself, the digital part, I never thought was part of marketing. I had a marketing job probably 4 or 5 years until a company I worked for realized I knew how to build SQL databases. And they said, well, if you can build SQL databases, then you need to be our Salesforce admin. And so from sales,
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, exactly. So just by understanding relational databases, like you said, you went from one to the other because it kind of pulled you into it based on your previous knowledge. And so from Salesforce came Pardot and Marketo. And so when all of a sudden that marketing and data came together for me was the new title of digital marketer, which didn't exist either. So I really, really respect where you're coming from. So let's dive into the data. This is a question I want to ask you because most marketers, especially if they're close to operations, has something like this. And so I want to ask you, when talking to marketers, if you're talking to a world of marketers, what is one big thing you would love to get off your chest right now that you wish every marketer could understand today about data? What would it be?
Well, it would be this. Data is an ingredient, right? And if you're cooking, ingredients are important, right? Not going to say that they're not, because if all you got is mac and cheese, I don't care how good a cook you are, you're making mac and cheese, right?
Okay.
But it's one of 4 parts to the puzzle. You have the data. You have, think about this, like you have ingredients, right? You have your skills as a cook. You have the tools that you have available to you, right? If you're making soup and all you got's a frying pan, you're going to have a real hard time making soup.
Yeah.
And you've got to have the recipe, right? Like, what are you cooking? What's the outcome you're after? A lot of marketers think data is one of two things. Either it's a curse, and it's, and they didn't sign up to be doing math and marketing, which is, one perspective, or the opposite extreme. They think it's some kind of magic fairy dust. You sprinkle it on something and it's instantly better. Like, no, it's not MSG. It's something else, and you need all four pieces working together. And where the gap is a lot of the time is not in the data itself. It's not even the tools either, although every MarTech vendor would like you to think it is, because that's how they sell things. It is in the people and their skills, and it's the processes you have internally. Those are the things that are most of the time broken in organizations. And if you've got a problem with data in marketing, you actually probably have a people and process problem, and the data is just a symptom of much bigger organizational problems.
That's interesting, because anybody in marketing operations typically has some inside jokes they have with each other about people, right? Um, I had a salesperson actually tell me that he was not going to do administrative work. And I'm asking, what do you mean by administrative work? He said, well, you asked me in Salesforce to check this box and reassign this or to do things. And he's like, that's administrative work. I don't want to check where this lead came from. I don't want to tell you how I met them. I don't want to fill out more than just name and email address. That's administrative work. So I said, well, you're leaving out all the other things that marketers need to know to bring you better leads. Was it at the trade show? Was it via email? How do we know trade shows even work if you don't tell us you met them at a trade show? So it's interesting you said people, and I think no matter how much technology you put in place, it does come back to people, huh?
Yep, people are the worst. I love technology.
I'm glad you said it. I'm glad you put it out there and said it.
Humans. Humans
let's get it off our chest.
Exactly. Humans are just messy, painful, bags of mostly water.
I love it. I love where this is going already, because you're saying things that anybody who gets anywhere near market operations wants to say, because sometimes it's just humans. You can automate the crap out of something, but still there's humans. And if you go too far to automations, then the humans get upset because they want control of things that they're not going to do. Simply put.
And you know what? That's fine. They have to be ready then to be made obsolete. And I don't say that lightly. I'm actually working on a blog post that I was writing this morning using one of the new GPT models. So if you're not familiar, GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. It's a natural language generation form of AI.
Okay.
And over the last 3 years, they've been getting better and better and better. The newest generation are so incredible. I took a really terrible press release. I found this press release from some plumbing company in like Oklahoma on like why why trees can disrupt your plumbing. And I took just the first paragraph of the press release and I fed it to this new version of GPT. And I said, write me the rest of this press release. And it did. It spit out, it generated the rest of the press release, and I compared it to the original, and it was so much better. So the original was just like a lot of blathering and stuff, and so says this and these things. And in the revised version that the machine guessed at, it made a bullet point of here are the things that you should know. Like, don't plant trees more than closer than 5 feet to your house. Don't plant fruit and nut trees closer than 12 feet to your house. Put down mulch. Mulch helps keep soil moisture near the surface so trees don't push their roots down as far. I'm like, I didn't know this. And I had to go and verify that what the machine synthesized was actually true. And it was. And I was like, this is really good. Like, so the act of administrative work, right, of writing a press release, a machine did it better than I would have. And it did it better than what the company originally put out. So if someone has the perspective that they are, work like that is below them, well, then yes, machines will do that, and it'll keep creeping up on you until you are obsolete, unless you keep advancing your skills to keep pace with the machines and focusing on the things that the machines can't do. But a lot of these tasks that we do in marketing are slowly and surely going to go to the machines because they'll do a better job of them, and they'll do them with less complaining, and they'll do them for lower cost.
So pivoting away from the sales guy who is the human, the water bag that we're worried about, the marketer. So AI and marketing, and this isn't just analytics. This is actually creating things. So From a standpoint of creation, now, previously, when you look at spun articles by a computer, the biggest issues were grammar. The grammar was bad or it didn't make sense. They were the right words, but they were in the wrong order, kind of thing. But for what I'm hearing now, you're saying that it's possible they could do better research faster and it still all makes sense. And I guess you could also spin in SEO in there too. Computer can do more research for SEO and create a better article. So even the creative people have to watch their backs too, huh?
That's exactly right. And here's the thing. One of the things that Google announced recently at its marketing live thing was that they've got this new SEO model, right? It's called MUM. And what MUM is it's a multi-domain. It's called the Multitask Unified Model. And what it does is it's bringing together a whole bunch of different content into a completely new way of ranking search results. The old way of sort of index, retrieve, and rank sort of did things in steps. So it's relatively speaking slow. This newer model tries to take into account all of the context of the documents it's ingesting and then spit out results much faster, but also cross domains. So things like this podcast, the video that goes with this, the text, it's comparing what we've created with known expertise, right? With known good things. So if you write something that's really expert and Google compares it to, say, like a book on the topic, it will say, okay, well, what you've written seems to mirror the language, sort of the semantics of the known good things. So we're going to say that you're probably an authority on this thing. On the other hand, if you outsource your blog to like your teenage cousin, and they give an SEO checklist, but they basically write gibberish, right? Or, your dog could just walk across the keyboard and come about the same thing. This model is going to look at these two things and go, well, this one doesn't look like the expert model, so we're going to rank that lower. So it's incumbent upon us as content marketers to figure out what do we need to do to be perceived as expert, to provide Google with all the inputs it needs to show our stuff first, right? Real simple example of this, you go on YouTube, watch a video. Most of the time, there's a closed caption button. Now, for most video creators do not upload closed captions, right? Only about like 14% or so do. You should, by the way. It's for two reasons. One, it's good for accessibility. And two, that data, those closed captions, is what Google ingests into its model to understand what your video is about. Image recognition, visual recognition. So these new models that Google's coming up with are going to radically change how SEO is done. It's not going away. It's going to put the burden of being authoritative, of having real expertise on us. It's going to be a really, really hard time, by the way, for agencies, because there is no substitute in this new type of model for actual expertise. You can't hand it to the junior account coordinator who just graduated college and say, okay, create some content on something like, I don't know, spike proteins on coronaviruses. They're not going to be able to do it. Not to the same level of authority that someone who has an actual PhD in virology will be to create the same thing. And in these models, Google will look at it and go, well, this was written by like the intern, and this was written by a PhD. We're going to give the authority score to the PhD.
I think that in itself is one of the strongest arguments. And I use this when I talk to my podcast customers. When it comes to podcasting and thought leadership, the conversations that you and I are having right now, for example, we're talking from an area of expertise. It's natural conversation, something that a computer won't be able to, to replicate as well. And we're experts. So if a company needs to create content and they're recording their thought leader conversations, they're recording podcasts or creating videos from conversations, then they're generating thousands of words that are in natural language from experts. You can't send that to the marketing department or intern to write this stuff up.
Nope.
You're much better off getting your CEO or your technologist to say, hey, can I have 30 minutes of your time to talk to you? Get him to talk and create the kind of language, the kind of information that's conversational, that has all the lingo in it, but it's not spun and a computer can't tell that it's spun. It's real, authentic information, right?
Exactly. And you're going to have anomalies in there that are the markers of expertise. And that's something that, again, a lot of these folks who are in the SEO world, particularly in the agency side, will miss. If I am talking about, for example, machine learning, maybe we're doing predictive analytics, I'm going to have weird expressions and things like centering and scaling, or I'm going to say something like Fourier transforms that someone just researching off of a keyword list from an SEO tool is not going to get, because they're little
Right.
oddities. There's these little artifacts. When you talk about, for example, cooking, like you talk about making a tomato caprese salad. If a person who's just copying and pasting from another source is going to have you, okay, put tomatoes, put basil, put salt, put mozzarella cheese, and some balsamic vinegar, right? That's pretty standard. But the expert will be explaining, you put the tomatoes down and then you put the salt on, because tomatoes plus salt creates a natural form of glutamic acid, right? Which is
It's a word.
MSG, right? And
Mm-hmm.
again,
Mm-hmm.
that's the difference between expertise and someone's copying and pasting from wherever. And you're going to, and Google, because it's pulling from known authoritative sources, is going to have those catalogs of anomalies that the 22-year-old, no offense to 22-year-olds, but the 22-year-old account coordinator is just not going to have.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've tried to, hire writers for both myself, for my agency, for clients. And the first thing I ask them, I say, well, send me some samples of what you have. And first of all, unless you're willing to do a lot of research, then don't even submit anything, because unless you do a lot of research, you won't even scratch the surface of where we're going with the quality that's needed. And
Exactly.
even then, that level you just spoke of, with those additional words and things that come from an expert, still is going to be hard to get those things in there.
Exactly.
Hmm.
So, which in some ways will be good, because it will mean higher quality content. For us as consumers, it'll be good because we'll get better answers out of Google, right? We will trust it more. It'll be good for companies that have legitimate expertise. It'll be bad for companies that don't.
Yeah, that's when you got to pay your analyst to come in and talk for you. Yeah, which
Exactly.
that's real money talking about there, or us. Still, we're not free either. There we go. Yeah, I mean the expertise. If you don't have it in house, you got to bring it in house, have those conversations, capture them, record them, and create. It's almost the whole theory of document versus create.
Mm-hmm.
If you document an expert doing their thing, you've got some really great content. If you try to create it, it's going to be really tough to do and satisfy Google.
Exactly.
So let me pivot a little bit, and talk about some things that are kind of timely. So I work with several large organizations on their marketing operations, and two of the hottest topics right now are the changes in Google Analytics, the new version, as well as changes in the big one, third-party cookie tracking. So regarding cookies, while the first wave of hype has hit us, there's still a lot of work to be done. So I want to ask you, for organizations that have multiple domains, multiple analytics platforms, multiple marketing automation platforms, what should be their worry right now? What should they be thinking about?
Uh, a lot of that's marketing tech, right? So if you have multiple domains, you can most of the tools do offer some level of cross domain support. Ideally, what you're doing is you're actually having stuff be subdomained, um, and that's sort of the way around that. With third-party cookie tracking in general, I mean, the biggest impact really is going to be there on the advertising side, on what you can get from ad tech platforms. Google, again, at their Marketing Live conference was very interesting. They are using their machine learning capabilities, plus the fact that they own a substantial amount of the consumer tech stack, to essentially do an end run around the end of cookies. They don't need cookies to infer data anymore, because they have all the behavioral data. Think about it. They own Chrome, right? Chrome is 66% of the browser market. They own Google Search, which is 92% of the search market. They own the Android system, right? Which is the operating system on 70% of mobile phones. They own
And YouTube.
YouTube, so they know what you're
Yeah.
watching. They own Gmail. They know what you're reading. They own Google Home, so they know what temperature your house is.
They own my TV because I have YouTube TV.
Exactly. They own your TV. They own Chromecast, right? Which is not only installed on in a lot of TVs, but is also like half the conference rooms, that businesses have. They own Google Analytics and persuaded millions of us to put it on all of our websites. So their digital footprint is so big that it really doesn't matter whether cookies there or not, because they have first party visibility for themselves into pretty much everything that a large enough sample of consumers is doing, that they can draw and infer really good models from that. They don't need cookies to be able to do cross-domain tracking. I mean, again, they have Google Analytics, right? We've put Google Analytics all around the web. It's on pretty much every site you go to. They don't need a cookie to know that you went from your website to mine, because the two instances of Google Analytics just share that data with Google. So Google has done what no other tech company has done, in that they have infiltrated so much of our every part of our lives that they don't have to worry about that visibility. The What that will mean is, though, is that there will be increased competition for inventory, particularly in the Google ad system, and you can expect those prices to go up because their
Mm,
targeting will just work better. Whereas other companies like Facebook, which does not have the same kind of footprint, as big as Facebook is not in your refrigerator. Facebook is not on your TV. Facebook is not in your car. It's just an app on your phone. And given how much that they've done to damage trust, particularly in the last year or
mm.
two, they're in much greater trouble than Google is. So that's where I feel like we are on third party cookies. And yeah, Google Analytics is a whole other creature.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I have websites that I run, and I work with organizations with big websites, and it's a headache to go through and change things over to Google 4 versus 3. Is there any real urgency in that? Is there going to be a time when your 3 no longer works, or will it just be the matter of better functionality on 4?
They will eventually sunset it, like they did sunset like the original Urchin tracking codes, the ga.js. They sunset that in 2014, I think, was when that stopped working. Which was 9 years after they acquired it, so it's not
Mm,
exactly it wasn't an overnight thing. All new development, all new features, and all the stuff that Google's talking about, like inferring behavioral data, all that's going to be in Google Analytics 4 only. So if you want
mm,
any of the new stuff that they're coming out with, it's going to be in there. The big thing with Google Analytics 4 is that people are misunderstanding what it does, because we got used to what Google Analytics 3 did. Google Analytics 3 is kind of an all-in-one Swiss Army knife, right? You put it on your website, you can see stuff, you can get reports and all this stuff. That's not what GA4 is. Configuration and tracking and stuff is now effectively in the domain of Tag Manager. You should be using Google Tag Manager. So all your configuration, like your goals, setting up the events needed to track conversions, Google Analytics 4 happens in Tag Manager, right? There's
mm,
Google Analytics 4, which is the analytical engine. It's a BI tool, right? It is a true analysis tool. There's even a section called Analysis Hub, right? And then the reporting engine is Google Data Studio. You're supposed to be doing
mm,
all your reporting and visualization there. So now, instead of one thing that kind of was okay, it was a good product, they've split it up to have 3 best of breed products that each focus on what that specific thing does. And it's a big mind shift for people, because they are used to just going into Google Analytics and running an ad hoc report. No, you run an analysis. You try and solve a problem in a BI tool. But then once you understand the problem and solution, you then port that to your reporting tool and you provide that reporting to your users. One of the things that's really challenged a lot of marketers with GA4 is that the interface, A, is so different, and B, is a little slim, for what they're used to. Like all the pre-canned
mhm,
reports aren't in there, and the things that they're used to. And it's pretty slim. The analysis hub really is the core of it. Why? Because you're not supposed to be in there doing reports. You're supposed to be in Data Studio. This
mm.
makes a lot of sense because it lets GA4 be a more powerful tool, albeit slightly less user friendly, because all the user friendly stuff goes to Data Studio. And it makes organizational sense because you don't want your executives tooling around in Google Analytics. That's just a recipe for frustration for everybody. You want to give them a Data Studio dashboard. They can manipulate a few boxes, they can get the information they need, they go away happy, and you get to keep the analysis portion within GA4. That's what's so different about it, and why people are struggling so much to adopt it, because they're used to having one place to do everything, and now they have to think about 3 different places and have a lot more governance and process as to what goes where.
That's very good. That's very clear. I'm glad you said that, because that is even something that I saw when I first went into GA4 was it's slim. Where is everything? And so what you're saying is don't expect everything to be in one place, because it's grown so big. Maybe it's even better to have it compartmentalized and go deeper in individual places than try to cram everything in one place.
Exactly right.
Okay. Well, that I think it's a gem right there for anybody who peeps into G4 or starts using Google Analytics 4. They know what to prepare themselves for. That don't try to do everything in one place.
Exactly.
And I know you go a lot deeper in that and lots of other things. So before we go too much further, I want to make sure, and this isn't a wrap up, but I want to make sure that the people listening to this podcast know where else to contact you. So tell me real quick, your website, your podcast, we'll get into the book a little bit later too, as well.
Yeah, so my company's website is TrustInsights.ai, and one of my podcasts is there. I have another podcast too, and then my personal blog is over at ChristopherSPenn.com, and you can find everything branches off from all those places. The other podcast that I do, I've been doing since 2006 with my partner John Wall, is Marketing Over Coffee, and that is probably on like episode like 700 or something now.
That's the one I want to dig into. So I have to admit, I just became aware of that podcast, and I see you've been very successful at it, and it goes deep into the things we just spoke about a moment ago, plus more in all these hundreds of episodes. So, how many episodes are you in?
That's 700 now.
700. Okay, that is unreal. So that's so admirable. So, tell us, what was the key to keeping a podcast going that long?
Is have a routine, right? You record at as close to a specific day and time as you can. And B, the thing that makes Marketing Over Coffee useful is that it's driven not by us, but by the audience, by like people asking questions. And the more that people ask questions, the easier it is for you to create lots of content. Marcus Sheridan has a great book that you actually don't need to read because the title tells you everything you need to know about what's in the book. It's called They Ask, You Answer, right? That's it. That's the entire content strategy. You probably should still read the book anyway. But that's all you need to create long-form content that's valuable, that's rich, and that can go on forever because people have questions. You have answers to those questions. Answer people's questions. And there's, the general rule of thumb I was always taught when I was learning how to teach was that for every one person who raises their hand with a question, there's 10 other people who have the exact same question, but they're afraid to raise their hands. So, and now in the digital world, I think it's probably close to like one person has a question, 1,000 people have that same question. And, they're just lurking. You don't even know they're there, but they're reading, they're listening. And so when we get all these questions, we just answer them. So on Marketing Over Coffee, John and I created the show basically to keep ourselves informed as to what's going on in marketing. Oh, here's some cool articles and things, and looking at stuff and I didn't know this was a thing. Same with my newsletter. Like I've been doing an email newsletter since 2010, a weekly email newsletter, just my own thing. Every Sunday, it's called Almost Timely News, and we're like 220,000 subscribers now, and it was for me, right? I need to go look through the articles from the last week, see what happened in the industry. And I put the ones I thought were useful into my newsletter because I curated it. I started a pandemic newsletter in January of 2020 when I first heard about the pandemic, before it even had the name COVID-19. And that's a daily newsletter. And all that is me going, okay, well, what do I need to read about from acknowledged authorities and experts, virologists, immunologists, and stuff about the pandemic? I was telling folks, in late January, you should be stocking up. You should have some N95 masks. Have these things ready to go. So because this looks like it's going to be a thing. I remember I reached out to a few conferences I was speaking at, saying like, "Hey, this looks like it's going to be a thing. Backup plan. If you need me to, I can record my session as a video." I got all these emails back saying, "What are you talking about? This is nothing." Sure enough, those conferences that were in April, like, "Oh yeah, we need you to record that session." So the process of creating content should be about you learning and you getting knowledge and you answering people's questions. Because if you are learning, and this is one of the golden rules of content marketing, if you are learning, then by default, your audience is learning because they're following you. If you're creating stuff and you're not learning, then they may not be learning either. They may see like, yeah, it's the same old thing. It's getting stale. But every time you put something out there that's new, like, I didn't know this was a thing. Now you're teaching your audience. And so if you want longevity, you keep learning and keep sharing what you learn. What's the old joke? How do you tell an aerobics instructor they've taken one more class than everyone else has, right?
Yeah.
It's the exact same thing in marketing. If you're learning about your industry and you're sharing what you learn as you learn it, you're taking people on the journey with you. And as long as you keep learning, that journey is infinite.
One of the litmus tests I have in terms of looking for people for this podcast is, can I learn something from them? Because I figure, okay, I'm at I won't say expert, a mature level in my marketing career. I know a little bit about marketing. I want to make sure I interview people who I can learn from, because if I can learn from them, then I know my audience up and down can learn from them as well. when I looked at your background and bio, I said, wow, I can learn a lot from this guy. I want to ask him a million questions in this 30 minutes. How can I get more information out of this guy? So I said, okay, he will be an absolutely great, guest on the show because, even if I have bullet points of what I want to ask, as I listen to you, I'm going to learn something else
Mhm.
and I'm going to ask more questions. I have some guests who want to do a pre-show conversation. If you do that, then I may ask the good questions because I'm genuinely interested in learning, and we may blow some of the great conversation on the pre-recording and not the actual podcast. But you made two very good points there about content creation, and I think it's the root of all best content. In regards to how long your podcast ran, in regard to your newsletter, which it's somewhere along the line, I guess when we connected, I got on your newsletter, and I really appreciate it. It's valuable, both answering questions in the podcast, answering questions in the newsletter. That is you giving. You're giving information, and the expectation isn't to sell something. It's just giving, giving, giving. And the reward you got from all that giving is, a years long podcast, hundreds of episodes, is still going, a newsletter that's growing. And I'll say it's a bit famous because I've heard your newsletter rather is popular because it's known to give good information. And when I first saw it, I said, well, no wonder why, because it's value packed. I don't mind getting this email because I look forward to reading the information that's in it. So, for those who go at creating content solely for business, I want to give them some inspiration. The fact that, okay, you've given and you've given, you've given, but how has your podcast and your newsletter, how has that affected you from a business standpoint?
70% of our leads come from one or both. 70%.
Wow.
Um,
70% of your leads come from giving information.
yes, because here's the thing. In fact, I'll show this with a name. This is a DVD from a martial art that I practice, right? And this is a seminar, right? This is a lot of knowledge. I can give you this DVD, right? And it contains the secrets to certain types of martial arts weapons and things. You will learn a ton from this. But guess what? If you don't actually practice, it doesn't matter, right? This is information. I'm giving it to you, but having this doesn't make you a black belt. And one of the fears that a lot of marketers and business execs have is, if we give away the information, people won't buy from us. If that was true, there would be no such thing as restaurants. Right? People still want someone else to cook for them. You can have all the recipes. Just because you read Guy Fieri's recipe on food.com does not mean that you are Guy Fieri, right? You are not. You don't have his skill. You don't have his tools. You don't have his ingredients, right? Back to where we started this show. You do have the recipe. You still got to do those other things. When you give people information, you're effectively giving them the recipe. And yes, 1% or so probably are going to say, yep, I will take that. I'll do that. I don't need you anymore. Great. They weren't going to buy from you anyway. The other 99% of people go, great, I've got the recipe. And they try and cook it. They're like, holy crap, I just lit my kitchen on fire.
I should have just paid somebody.
and they're like, I don't have that tool. I don't have that skill. I don't have those ingredients. You know what? Why don't you come to my house and cook for me? Right. And when we give away information in business, it's exactly the same thing. Here's the recipe. Try it if you like, knowing full well that it's probably not going to go so well. And you will come back and say, okay, you know what? I still like the idea of this. Will you please make it for me? Right. And that's how you build a successful relationship. You give people what they need, that they want to do it themselves, or give them a version they can do it themselves. But then say, if you want the good stuff, let's work together let's collaborate on something. Let's do some business together. And that, I think that reassurance is important, particularly for people who are very motivated by fear. Like, you're going to give away all the secrets. I'm sorry. There are very, very few secrets. And they're ones you already know. Like, what's the secret to weight loss? Eat less, exercise more, right? how do you make money in the stock market? Buy low, sell high. Right? Those are the secrets.
Yeah, and as a consumer, you're looking for someone who knows her stuff.
Exactly.
And the guy who is demonstrating his stuff, that he knows his stuff, that's who you want to gravitate towards. You may have no interest in doing it, but you want someone to do it. And who do you know knows what they're doing unless they tell you? I actually had a prospect call me last week, and he said, and this is so fun to hear. He said, I was watching one of your videos and I learned so much. I felt guilty. I wanted to try to give you some money. He's like, this guy did not have to tell me all this stuff. he gave me so much information. I want to give him a shot at this business because I feel like I owe him something already. And that's an amazing feeling when you can get a really quick return on the fact that you gave someone something they appreciated it. But again, I want to recite the number you said: 70% of business coming from giving information.
Exactly.
That is powerful. That is powerful. So before we do wrap up, I want to talk about um, you have a book. Did you have a new book coming out
I
recently?
did. It's called AI for Marketers. It's the third edition.
Okay.
This is 50% longer.
Okay.
And the book is about how to wrap your brain around the use of AI in marketing. Um, the reason for the third edition is because the field changes so much, and in fact, is already out of date because there's new things, new things as of last week that changed some of it. But the concepts are all the same, and it's to help you do two things. One, to help you understand that this stuff is not magic; it's all mathematics, and you don't have to do math to read the book, by the way. But it's just to
That's a
understand
good
it's
point because you might scare some folks like me.
it's all just the mechanics and mathematics and statistics. That's all machine learning really is. And two, I gave you a bunch of examples and things so that it helps you it helps you tune your BS detector a little bit, because there's a lot of Martech right now where companies saying, "Oh, we've got our product's different because it's got AI in it." Well, yeah, if you can do a linear regression, technically it's got AI in it, but that's you can do that in Excel too. Um, and so I want people to have a little bit more of a BS detector when it comes to this stuff, to understand when a company is actually got the goods, like they can do what they say they're doing, and when they're just using it as a sales and marketing trick. The easiest way, and this is a fun tip, the easiest
Mhm.
way to determine who's got the goods and who doesn't is if a company will let you talk to an engineer
Mm.
unaccompanied by a sales guy. Like if they'll let you talk to the people who make it, uh, they're probably the real deal, because you can ask the engineers honest questions, and most of the time you're going to get back brutally honest answers. I remember
Yeah.
I was at the Martech conference, and I was talking to this one sales guy, and I said, "Oh yeah, I saw the presentation on that main stage, and it said that your product does this and this and this." He's like, "No, it doesn't. We don't do that." He's like, "All this thing is a bunch of random forests." I'm like, "Okay, so it does have machine learning in it. You told me what it is, and we walked through some of the specifics. And like, okay, I actually trust you, the engineer, because you built this thing." And the sales guy was probably doesn't even have any idea what the words coming out of his mouth mean. It's just that that's what he was told to say. And then you talk to companies like, "Oh no, you can't talk to anybody except the sales guy. It's all proprietary. It's all our black box secret." Like, no, it's not.
Mm. Well, sales is selling next year. They're selling what they hope the product will become. And then if they mess around and sell it, they'll run back to the engineer and say, "Hey, can we make this happen?" And hope he says yes.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
So yeah, if your book can help people tune up their BS detector, that is a big plus because marketers, we buy a lot of tech. We buy a lot of software, we buy a lot of tech. And as a marketing operations person, I've found marketers who bought a lot of things where I said, "Ooh, you should have asked somebody before you bought that because they just sold you smoke and mirrors." They don't actually
Exactly.
do that. They claim to integrate with this and integrate with that, but they really don't. Those kind of things can definitely be missing. So I want to ask you this though, and this is something that actually I think we're both speaking. This course of podcasts come out after this, but we were both speaking, I think, at Content Tech
Yep.
for CMI Content Marketing Institute. And I'll be stepping a little bit into your neck of the woods, talking about tracking content marketing all the way to the bottom line, using things like UTMs and those kind of things. And, one of the things that comes up a lot is, from a marketer standpoint, there is marketing that you can't measure, but you still have to do. And that's a tough one. See, even your face changed when I said that because we want to measure everything. And I personally am on both sides of the fence. I am trying to measure everything. I want everything to matter to the bottom line. I want to help marketers show your value. Everything you do should be measured and show up at the bottom line so you can tell sales, "Hey, look, hey CFO, that everything we did mattered and that we're not just a cost center, we're also a profit center." But there are some things that live on from old school marketing, like branding and things are a little bit more difficult to measure. No, okay. So you said no. So if I say to you, there is some marketing that is worth doing that you can't measure. What do you say to that?
Everything in marketing can be measured. It is a question of whether you are willing to invest in measurement to do it or not, right?
Mm.
But the best practice that I recommend to people that nobody ever does is 25 cents on the dollar. For every dollar you spend in marketing, spend 25 cents on measurement. What does the CMO and the CFO want to spend? A, a penny at most to measure things. When we talk about
Okay.
brand is straightforward to measure. You have things like market research. You have things like continuously running surveys. You have things like branded organic search tracking. There's so many good measures. You can do sophisticated analysis to say, okay, what is the mathematical relationship between our market research, our unaided recall surveys, and purchase inquiries? And you can develop mathematics for that, and it gives you that answer. What's the problem? Market research is expensive. Market research requires a lot of expertise, right? All these things that make it slightly more challenging to use that data, but it absolutely can be measured. And there are many companies, particularly the big enterprises, spend a fortune on it. Coca-Cola spends a king's ransom on measuring brand strength, and they've developed really good ways of doing that. I remember my friend Scott Monty, when he was working at Ford Motor Company, said that they had clear tracking that measured brand sentiment from social media and showed that it shows up at dealerships with about a 2.5 month lag, right? There is nothing that can't be measured as long as you are willing to invest enough time and money in advance to do it. It'd be like, let me ask you, Lee, how was my mac and cheese last night? And you're
Hmm.
like, what?
How do you measure that? Well, yeah, I'm thinking about it within the context of our conversation. Subjectively, I could say it was good, but how do I measure it from a group of people? Is it by how much was left over
No,
compared
I
to
mean,
what
no,
was left
just
over
just
last
think
time?
about it this way, right? I haven't told you the ingredients. You don't know how I made it. You don't have the recipe, right?
The
You don't know
data's
what
not
tools
there.
I did. You have none of that stuff. So you really can't say. But if you had invested the time to stand in my kitchen with me and watch me prepare it and see what cheeses I put in, how I made the roux and all this stuff, you would be able to say very confidently, yes, I can tell you exactly how good it is because I can compare it then to known best practices and things. I can taste test it and go, okay, this is it. You didn't let the roux sit long enough. Um, but that would require a lot of investment, right? That would require you to be there and to invest up front. And that's where particularly CMOs and CFOs are at loggerheads. You've got to invest up front to say, like, I'm going to run existing market research just to figure out the baseline for our brand. How much do people like us now? What's their intent to purchase? So all this data is available. When people say you can't measure something in marketing, what they're really saying is I am unwilling to spend the money and the time it takes to measure these things. I don't want to spend the
So,
money, and
so,
so I
so help
can't
me
measure
right
it.
here. Help me write this script. So I'm the marketer, and I'm prone to say we can't measure that. So help me rewrite the script. So I have my budget in my hand. I know how much marketing budget we have. So is the script better off for me to say everything is measurable, but within the budget that we have right now, we can only measure maybe these things, right?
Exactly. Think
So
of it
that's
as like the
better.
Chinese food menu. Like, okay, you get one from column A, two from column B. Um, what do you want to add on, or what do you not want to do if you want this level of measurement? And you present it as choice to people and say, like, do you want to understand the strength of your brand? Great, it will cost you, $100,000 spread over 12 months to do that. How important is that to you? Well, the person could say it's very important. Here's $100,000. Go measure my brand. Or they say, no, you're crazy. I'm not spending that money. Like, great. Then you don't know what the strength of your brand. And you have to acknowledge that from this point on, you made that decision to say you were not willing to make that investment. And that's okay. But you cannot then come back and ask that question. Why don't you tell me the strength of my brand? Because you didn't buy it. It's like, why isn't there a Tesla in my driveway? Because you didn't buy it.
I tend to be the guy who worries so much about the question I'll be asked next year. Like, if we don't start collecting this data right now, you're going to find yourself in a boardroom next year being asked about something that you did not collect. And you have to tell the executive, we don't know. We don't have that data. And hopefully you can do like you just said, because you said not to collect it. Hopefully you have some backup to say you didn't buy this analytics platform, so we don't have the data. I think more often it's I don't care how or why. I don't want to get into the weeds. You just told me you don't have the data. And that's a difficult place for marketers to find themselves in.
It is. It's a very difficult place. And the good news is the job market is so tight right now. You can say to that person, great, I'm leaving. I'm going to a different company.
Peace, I'm out of here.
Good luck. See ya. But to that point, and this goes back to something we were talking about earlier, Google Analytics 4 is powered by machine learning. Machine learning is powered by data. If you don't go and install it now and set it up now, even if you don't use it now, if it's not in place to collect that data, it can't learn. And then by the time you need to transition to it, your competitors who have been collecting that data will be far ahead of you, and they'll be getting better insights out of the software. So please, if you take nothing else away, please go install it today and just let it passively collect data.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, it's been amazing talking with you. I hope we get a chance to talk again. You are a plethora of information, and I want to make sure that our listeners can find you and watch your. So tell us, I know you have a YouTube channel and the podcast. So give us those again and your website again, so they can know how to find you.
Easiest ways. If you want to see a lot of my work stuff, go to TrustInsights.ai, and you can see all the work stuff from there. And you want to see my own personal stuff, go to ChristopherSPenn.com. And again, you can find the newsletter and podcast and YouTube and all that stuff from there as well. It's just easy to go to one of those two places.
He's got lots of content, so as deep as you want to dig, he's got it for you, and I really appreciate that. So once again, Chris, thanks for joining the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Business of Marketing podcast, a show brought to you by ContentMonster.com, the producer of B2B digital marketing content. Show notes can be found on ContentMonster.com, as well as aleejudge.com. To continue the conversation, be sure to follow the podcast on your favorite podcast platform.